Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. Let me just go up to the very first slide. So everyone, this is just a SAC-only webinar today. Hopefully I'm familiar with most of you who are calling in, but if not, I'm Erin Farley, and I'm a research associate here at JRSA, and I'm also the project manager for the SJS TTA project for JRSA. And before I welcome our presenter, I want to let people know that we will have a skill building webinar scheduled for April 26th. It's going to be on survival analysis. It's going to be at 3 o'clock, and it will be led by Dr. Dan O'Connell from the Center for Drug and Health Studies. He's done a couple of our webinars in the past, and so I'm really excited about that. And then we also have one scheduled the following week, and that is going to be hosted by Washington SAC and staff member, and that has not been released. Hopefully we will get that out to you all in the next day or two so that you will have a chance to sign up and register for that one as well. I would also like to take a moment to make an announcement, an important announcement regarding our conference, the Forum Conference. So there will be an announcement going out, I believe today. If for some reason it does not go out today, it's going to go out tomorrow. But it will say that after months of conversation and thoughtful deliberation, the Executive Committee of JRSA has chosen to partner with the Association of State Uniform Crime Reporting Programs for their annual conference in 2018. So JRSA has partnered with ASU CRP in the past for a conference, I believe in 2012. That's before my time, so I wasn't here for that, but there is a past relationship with ASU CRP, and this year it felt fitting to partner again in regards to the FBI's move to from summary data to incident-based reporting of crimes in the U.S. That's that deadline that's coming up 2021, and then also BJS's NCSX program. So I think there has been sort of, I've made a couple announcements, I believe, in the last brown bags that this, there was a decision that was going to be made very soon. And so that's it. The conference is, the ASU CRP conference is going to happen in September. So as I believe the forum is scheduled in August. So we'll have a little more time to sort of work out the details, which is good considering this is a change of the last few years. And we have reached out to BJS. They are aware of this change. And so I'm sure that SACs will have questions about travel. From my understanding, obviously there will be a process available to provide funding to be redirected to attend the ASU CRP conference. And so we will sort of handle that as we go forward. Again, the announcement with more information will be coming out today or tomorrow. And I just encourage everybody, who has any question at all, please reach out to us at JRSA. I will do the best to answer my questions, and if not, direct you to someone who will. So this is a really interesting and really exciting change. I'm looking forward to the ASU CRP conference, and if I didn't mention it, it will be in Denver. Well, actually, it's going to be in Colorado. It will be, I think it's going to be close to Denver. So the more details are in the announcement. So I just definitely wanted to put that out there straight away so that you guys are aware of the change. So with that, I want to welcome Joan Brody, who is going to present on how to write a successful grant application for the State Justice Statistics Program. She is a nationally known and successful grant writer and grant strategist. I'm really excited about today's presentation as well. I think it's going to be really great and informative. And before that, just to go through a few technical issues. So hopefully you all are familiar with this if you've been on any of our other webinars. You know, as you log in, you're going to get a little prompt of how to listen to and participate in this webinar via either the speakers on your computer or a headset or a phone call. So if anything happens and you get kicked out, you just follow that link to get back in. If you have any issues, you just go up to the upper left-hand toolbar and you can see audio. Click on audio. That will provide you with direction on how to call in if something happens. If you are experiencing technical problems and you are logged in, please write a chat message to me and I will do my best to resolve the issue. Jason Trask is our tech guru and he will be leaving partway through this presentation. And so, so if you do have any issues, just send them to me via chat. And then speaking of that, if you want to chat, you should see the chat option in your lower right-hand corner of your screen. And let me go to the next slide. If you, what would be best is if you click on host, presenter, or panelists so that we will be able to see that. I will be doing my best to track the questions. Feel free to, shoot us a question throughout the presentation and I will gently interrupt and give those questions to Joan. And so there's that. And then helping us count. So we know that some people do log on to their computers and have maybe one or two other staff members watching the webinar with them. So if that happens to be the situation that you're in, if you could just write in the chat message, the name that is registered for this webinar and maybe the number of people who are watching it with you, that would be really great. It helps us just to keep track of how many people are participating in the live webinar. And then in addition, we do have our usual poll that comes out at the end. And so we will just give a couple minutes at the end of the webinar to allow you all to finish that. And that will help us, gain some information and obviously help us evaluate how we're doing with our webinars this year. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joan and let her get started. This is a webinar that's about to take, I think, about approximately an hour. So I'm going to take the magic ball, and Joan, I'm going to drag it to you, and then you should have the power to change the slides.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Joan Brody. I am the grant strategist, grant writer. Thank you for the introduction, Erin, and thank you for everyone attending the webinar. So today we're going to talk about how to write a successful grant application for the State Justice Statistics Program. I think everyone knows about this solicitation. And I'm going to go over, in this session, I'm going to cover 4 main areas, and then obviously I have time at the end for questions and answers. But we're going to talk about thinking more strategically about grant funding, which you'll understand my approach and where I come from in this area as we go through the webinar. I'm going to talk about specific approaches to make your case for this grant so that you can write a winning application. And then I'm going to talk about some tips on the actual grant writing, kind of the nuts and bolts for a successful state justice statistics program for SACS grant application. And I'm hoping that some of the pointers I give throughout this entire webinar will also help you and your organizations, your SACs, identify additional funding resources and apply for additional federal funding, because you are able to do that, and it's a really good time of the year to have this webinar because we're just on the cusp of a lot of federal grants coming out. And so hopefully this is all timely and very helpful. So the first thing when we talk about grant writing is, we talk about grant writing. Some people say, well, grant writing is a science. Once you've mastered this skill set, you will be able to know how to write a foolproof or winning application. And so I like this this slide, this joke, because clearly there is no formula for writing grant applications. And writing a grant application takes skill, it takes patience, and it takes a little luck. And grants, let's face it, they're not the most interesting area in the whole world to talk about for about an hour. But I'm a self-professed grant geek, and maybe some of you out there listening are as well. And I hope, again, that, we can, add to your capacity and your ability to win a successful grant application or grant award. So the first area I'm going to talk about is thinking more strategically about grant funding. And the reason I listed it as this, my background, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, and you'll understand how I come to get involved in this kind of strategic grant development. So many years ago when Bill Bratton, who was the former police chief in New York, Boston, and LA at different points in his career, when he was in Boston, I worked for him, and it was during Clinton's crime bill, where at the time it was about 25 years ago, there was about $8 billion of federal funding available. And what we learned very quickly in the Boston Police Department at the time was if you think strategically about going after grant funding, if you're proactive, you could get a lot more money. And it kind of makes intuitive sense. If you think about it, the feds really don't have a constituency besides the District of Columbia, which is, a unique entity in terms of how the nation is set up. So they're always looking to go out and find the next great idea. And if you're an organization that needs money and you're able to tell them your great idea and they're able to use that idea to influence or inform a solicitation or to try to fund a pilot project, that's great. And so the more communication with the federal government, the better. And I think on this grant, I think this is a perfect example of that. So you're unique, you have the unique opportunity. There's, something like, I think, 51 plus stacks around the nation, and you have the opportunity to really kind of help influence where this funding, what it's going to fund, where it's going to go, what are the policy and program implications for some of the grants that you're going to seek funding for. So one of the things I like to do with all the organizations that I work with, and I work with many police departments, prosecutors' offices, research organizations, nonprofits, all over the country. I help them develop something I call a grant strategy. Sometimes I call it a grants agenda, but that's just a fancy name for a wish list. And everyone has needs and wishes. And knowing your needs is really the start of writing a good grant. I find that people who change their needs to fit the grant solicitation are not nearly as successful in getting funding. And that, in fact, if you're proactive and you stick to your kind of wish list, it ends up being a very good strategy for your overall grant-seeking efforts. And it's especially good advice for this 2018 SJS grant, which is due March 29th. And I'll mention a lot of details just because I'm a paranoid and neurotic grant writer, which is a good quality for a grant writer, but just to make sure that no one misses that deadline. But knowing your needs actually ends up being the hardest part of grant writing. And I always tell everyone that I should get these T-shirts printed up and, hand them out when I do presentations, because really writing the grant is the easiest part. Figuring out what you want to buy, that ends up being really difficult. You have to get a lot of people together to figure out what are our needs and how do we, how do we write those into a grant application that's going to get funded. And just going back, just one thing to the previous slide when I talked about the grant strategy, just keep this slide in mind a little bit, because one of the requirements of the SJS STAC Center grant is that you will need to show that you have a long-term plan or a plan. And this kind of wish list could be easily morphed into that. So again, writing the grant ends up being the easiest part. So what do you want to buy? That's kind of the first step in this process. And when you're looking at your grant funding and thinking about what you want to buy, it's really about strategy. Now, everyone on this call and all the people who work at the SACs, you guys are super smart people. I mean, the people at BJS are super smart people. This is not about showing who can write a grant that is, that is a high level or more intellectually sound grant. This is about developing an approach that will get funded. And if you think about it, you really need to find the way to present your idea in a way that I call you're hitting the reviewer's sweet spot. And what I mean by that is sometimes I find when I review proposals and applications is that people end up writing too high level. And again, super smart people really know what they're talking about. But when you think about the reviewer process, and all these grants are peer reviewed, so there's an independent kind of blind peer review process that the Office of Justice Programs, the Department of Justice goes through. When the reviewer panel, and I'm sure many of you have been peer reviewers, so you know this, you have to write it so that it's not too high level where someone who's on that review panel is looking everything up and kind of feels stupid because they don't know it. But you don't want to write it too low level so that the peer reviewers feel like you're being patronizing to them, and that especially something like a grant that you're writing, obviously you have to show some command of statistics and basic research methodologies, et cetera. So kind of finding that reviewer sweet spot is tough, and I always liken it, and as we talk about this, is to keep it simple. In the sections where you definitely have to talk about methodology and research practices, et cetera, that's when you're going to get a little more detailed. But really, your grant should be something that is easily understandable from a wide range of people. Again, the next thing is to look at the needs and find a match to this grant solicitation. So this is kind of really the focus of a lot of what I'm going to talk about for this grant. It is amazing to me how open-ended, like how many different areas, project areas this grant covers. I'm obviously not a SAC, and so I don't work in all these areas, but reading through this solicitation, I just couldn't believe. Like, I feel like it's, you should be able, it's going to probably be hard to choose which area that you want to write under because there's so much food for thought, as it were, here. There's so many areas that you could fit your needs into. And so, I think that's a great thing as you think about matching your needs to whatever area you're going to go for funding in this grant. And so this chart JRSA provided for me, I asked them, and I said, so you have all this funding out there for the SACs every year, so everyone's just always applying for it. And if you look at it, the last couple of years, it's kind of gone downhill. And so I just can't understand that because to me, a couple of things. One is most everyone who applies for this grant, who actually submits an application, gets funded. Obviously, there's some people, for whatever reason, it could be a technicality, it could be some other issue with their grant proposal, didn't get funding, but, my joke is, you really significantly increase your chance of getting money from this grant if you apply for it. So, I always, someone I work with in the federal government once said to me about a city that I was working with, they're leaving money on the table. And that's how I look at this grant. I feel like, please apply for this because you don't want to leave this money on the table. I believe there were 31 awards in 2017 for this. There's, I believe, 40, up to 40, and that's kind of a loose number, too, because it depends what people put in, how much they ask for. So, I think overall it's really good to apply for this grant. I think that one thing some people have said to me is that, well, the amount of money for the different areas, and we'll talk about this, might not fund as much as we'd like. But, one of the adages of grant writing is it takes money to make money. If you apply for a grant and maybe it's not going to fund everything that you want, but it gets your foot in the door and you're a good grantee, then the grantor, in this case BJS, and in other cases other funders, we'll see that you really have the skills and the ability and the capacity to implement this grant well, and that's going to lead to other money. And an example of that is we all know organizations that always get the grants, and we're like, how come they always get the grants? Because they're a known entity. They can be counted on by the grantor, and that's important. So specific approaches for this grant to make your case. So much, like I said already, can fit into this grant. And this grant has two basic program focus areas. One is the core capacity building projects, and the other is the special emphasis capacity building projects. And I kind of looked at this grant, and I thought to myself, capacity, that just means that they want to give you guys money to do your work. And I read a number of successful grant proposals from past years, and this is like what you guys do, so why not take more money from the feds to do it, and to do it better, to do it well, and to do it quality, of course, and to enhance and expand on your efforts. But this is kind of, you know, your bread and butter, and so there's an estimated 40 awards. The allocation, depending on, you know, the feds allocate funding differently every year. Sometimes I've read for this one it's $5 million is a lot, you know, in their allocation. Some said it's $6 million, but it really depends. They have some leeway, so that also again should encourage you to apply. The grants range from $75,000 to $225,000, and this I find interesting. You can start this grant, so if you apply, you know, by the end of this month, you can put the start date as early as August 1st, and that's just 5 months. It's actually less than 5 months from now. So you're going to get this money pretty quickly. So again, under
Joan,
the you know, heading encourage you to apply, to me this is a no-brainer.
Oh, Joan, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to interrupt real quickly. There, even though it does, you're right, sort of standardized, it does say August. One thing we sort of came up during a brown bag last month when we were talking about the grants and the BJS staff was on the call, is that they usually, in terms of, even though that's sort of written there, it's probably more likely that the awards will, and forgive me, I might be off a month. I think the awards might not even be given until August or September. So I think they said even though that's in there, the more realistic start time for a project will be October. And possibly, so they were saying you could project to start your project between October to January. Everybody who's listening, I take that with a grain of salt and just confirm that with your grant managers, but I kind of remember that coming up in an earlier brown bag, so I just wanted to caveat with that.
Okay, no, thanks, Erin, and you're actually right. The grant awards, and especially this year because everything's a little late, but if, or later than last year. Last year was early. This is actually more timely this year, but the grant awards won't be announced probably till September 30th. However, and this will be something I would encourage you, if you wanted that earlier start date, to ask your grant manager, because I think it's an important point. It may be retroactive to August 1st, so it's possible if you get the award that you'd be able to get reimbursed for expenses from August 1st because it's written in the solicitation, but I would check with them to be sure. That's a really, really good point. So we'll move from there. SJS program area. So again, I'm going to kind of be repeating what's in the solicitation, but I think it's worthwhile, again, just to show you kind of stepping out of the long solicitation. So on the core capacity building projects on page 6, they have several categories. It goes A through D. Under A, on the topic interest area, I mean, just look at that. Hate crimes, crimes committed on tribal lands, drug-related arrests, opioid-involved, trafficking, and then they give you examples. You know, some of the projects can, you know, go to meet the needs of the National Crime Statistics Exchange Initiative, and they give you, you know, 4 examples of projects that you could fund. And when you read through the solicitation, I think you'll find, you know, every time I read it, I find something new that's kind of prioritized and highlighted. And again, they're not highlighting or prioritizing these just to write it down. This is really, they're giving you almost a roadmap saying, here are some of the things we really want to fund and we're really going to look positively on if you apply for. So again, examining how law enforcement agencies have recorded the relationships between the victims and the offenders for violent offenses, providing analysis and evaluation of state IBR and our NIBUS NIBRS data for understanding property crimes, examine the reporting of simple and aggravated assaults to the state IBR programs for NIBRS, and then comparing IBR practices across reporting units in the state over time to understand changes in the use of different incident-based data codes. So again, a lot of food for thought just on, researching using, incident-based crime data. Another one under that was, they tell you they will fund, funding on this priority area may also be used to examine the utility of linking incident-based crime reports to a state's criminal history records for research purposes and be conducted in partnership with the state's criminal history record repository. That's on page 7. So again, still under core capacity, but a lot of different areas that you could really seek funding for. And then they go on. You can measure criminal justice system performance. I mean, a lot can go under that category. You can increase access to statistical data. Again, a lot of projects can go under that category. And then D is like the catch-all, other capacity building projects identified by the SAC. So again, there shouldn't be anything you want to do that you can't match to one of these or even the next category of grants.
Hey, Joan, can I jump in again one more time? Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can. Sorry. I just wanted to interrupt. I apologize. But just to step back a little bit and just to the category A, and just to note the bolding of that section on page 6 about data quality. I think that it would really be beneficial to kind of whatever SACs have done in the past in terms of talking about how they're going to examine and review data quality, to sort of continue to include that and maybe even move the dial a little bit further, maybe get into a little bit of detail. I've been having conversations with Matt Jaros and Stephanie, and I think that this is an area that's definitely of interest of where SACs are going with their procedures and their policies for assessing data quality. So I just kind of want to put a little emphasis on that section. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I am by no means an expert in all the work that all the SACs do. So, Erin, please, definitely please interrupt me when other information like that, because I think it's really helpful. Again, the more support and information, the better. Just continuing on the bottom of page 7, they talk about the core capacity building projects must include, and they talk about justification for each proposed project that explains how the project responds to your capacity building needs. Again, how they're connecting it. And the grant talks about this long-range plan, which is really just adding details to your wish list. And I know that sounds funny, but the reason that I love grant writing and grant strategy so much is, if you think about it, all this work in developing your needs is really, policy and programming for your organization. Again, writing it is easy. It's kind of figuring out, what do we want our organization to look like? What do we want to do? What do we want to spend our money on? What are our long-range plans and our short-range? But it's good stuff if you're kind of a policy wonk. And so you can take your wish list and you can really just morph it into a long-range plan if you don't have that already. That could be the start of one. And again, I think anything that you could send in with your application to fulfill that need will be welcome by BJS. They may have some suggestions in the future, or you could definitely talk to JRSI, which we're going to talk about in a minute, about helping you enhance that plan. But you have the building blocks already for that. So on this grant, on the capacity building one, it's it's $75,000 annually, which is up from last year. So it was $60,000 for this grant in years past, and they upped it to $75,000. And in talking to some people at JRSA about this grant, and just knowing the federal government, I think that they increase this because they're seeing all the great work that you're doing out there, and they're looking at the SACs and they're like, what a great resource, what great quality data, what great projects we're getting. So you guys must be doing something good because they don't often raise it or even by this much. And again, even though you might think, boy, that's going to hardly pay for, you know, a person with benefits in my city or my state or my jurisdiction, I think that it's like I said, it's a really good start. And I, you know, would strongly, again, encourage folks to take that step if you haven't and really apply for this funding. Going to the second program area. So this one, they fund more of the first program area than the second, at least in the past they have. Under this program area, it's a special emphasis capacity building project. And again, there's a lot here, you know, using administrative or operational criminal justice data for research. Boy, a lot of the places that I work around this country are really doing this exactly. And so I think there's a lot of projects out there. Conducting targeted analysis that use state criminal history records, and they give some examples. Evaluate for accuracy or completeness. Explore feasibility of using, these records as a source for statewide arrest or booking stats. Explore quality of court data. Obviously, court data, again, is a really big issue right now, something that we always haven't seen a focus on, but it's there now. Examine recidivism patterns of sex offenders using longer observation periods. So that's on the bottom.
I just want to interrupt one more time and again do that little emphasis with the bold regarding the data quality assessment tool they're recommending that people utilize and follow. So that's just I want to jump in real quick and put a little explanation point next to that for people to sort of think about that a little bit more in terms of what they've talked about in the past, using that or not using that, and how they can maybe build on that in this year's proposal. Okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Yeah, no, please. I mean, this is super helpful.
Yep.
And so the next thing they say in there, and this is kind of going to what Erin just said about how they, like, I didn't highlight that. It's highlighted on the slide before in the solicitation. The other thing that they highlight, and I thought this was so interesting, and I said wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because I feel like they're winking at you and saying, you know, if you do this, this will be looked upon really favorable. And it says here, because BJS is this is directly from the solicitation, is very interested in uniformity across states in such analytical areas, collaboration between states or a multi-stack approach is encouraged. And then they say it again on page 10. And so the reason that I'm highlighting this in a lot of grants that I work with, the federal government, I have seen them walk into a room, different agencies, and literally, I mean, practically, maybe they didn't actually wink, but I swear I saw them wink, and say to the different cities, if you submitted a regional approach, that would be looked upon very highly. And so that's kind of what this is saying. And so don't shy away from that, too, because, again, you know, I would talk to JRSA about how to do that with your budget and the kind of approach you're going to take. But, boy, you know, that would be something I think that'd be really looked on, and you'd strengthen new partnerships and collaborations, and that's always welcome, not only for this grant, but for many, many other Justice Department and potentially, you know, other state, local, and even private funders.
And I just want to take this opportunity, because it's just so fitting with you talking about that, to sort of advertise one of JRSA's services. So depending on how long people have been around who are attending right now, you may or may not be familiar with JRSA's MAP, which is the Mutual Assistance Program. It's been around for a while. It's kind of become a little sleepy, or has, you know, died in the last couple of years. It hasn't had a lot of activity. And so I just want to, in that context, sort of put that forward again, in that, you know, its intent is to link two SACs together. So if one SAC sort of needs technical assistance in one area and there's another SAC that has that technical expertise, or maybe there's a handful of them, that SAC could, maybe you could reach out, establish that sort of relationship before in terms of what you might want to collaborate with in a project or providing assistance to each other. You can write that into your grant that you may reach out to these people and utilize our program as a way to harness and create that relationship, or, you know, schedule ways to meet up. What if that, you know, if that interests anybody, because you know, I'm kind of sort of all over the place, is because it could be, you know, it could be almost anything. We have a lot of flexibility, I think, in what that MAP program could be utilized or directed to. And so in some ways, and again, I've been here since 2015, so I don't know if it's ever been written into the proposals before, but I think that's a great idea, because A, it shows the possibility for collaboration, and that you have us here as sort of the go-between to actually help secure that relationship and make it happen. And we have the funds to actually, you know, have people travel from one SAC to another to provide whatever technical assistance may or may not be necessary. And so if that is piquing anybody's interest, reach out to me, and maybe we could talk about what that may or may not look like, and how you know, how it could be sort of inserted into the project. So just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Yeah, and Erin, hold that thought for a second, because we're going to come back in just a minute. But really quickly, on the SJS program area 2, the maximum funding is $150 for this one, and it's a time frame of 12 to 36 months. But the reason I mentioned to Erin just now to hold on to that, we're going to talk about some grant writing tips now. But before we do, just a couple things. And one is, I, again, encourage you to read over this grant application or the RFP in detail. Like I said, each time you read it, you're going to find something else, and that's really going to help you shape your proposal, or think about the language they use, or how their priorities really will match yours, because there's so many priorities here. But the reason I said for Erin to hold that thought about the training and, you know, or the technical assistance is, so I put a list of 10 grant writing tips, but I recently learned, and so I'm going to have a 0.5. I'm going to call this 10.5 grant writing tips. And the first one is, this is related to what Erin was just talking about, but JRSA can review your grant proposal before you submit it. So, Erin, did you want to, you know, talk about how that would work?
Yeah. Sure, yeah. So we can, the due date is what, I think it is the 29th? Okay, so you know, anytime, you know, whatever format or draft version that you all have that you want to share with us, you know, early draft, later draft, we are, honestly, we are more than happy to take it and review it and provide whatever feedback that we can to sort of help strengthen it and maybe flesh out some ideas or what have you. And so the earlier that you can get it to us, the better, but, you know, as, you know, what has been said in the past, I'll continue to say it, like, if you send us it the day before, we'll do our best to review it. So, but again, the earlier the better. But that is, I mean, that's one of the big things that we're here for. And so I think that, you know, we do get a handful of SACs who do utilize that service, but I just sometimes would like to shout it from the rooftops to let you know, remind everybody that we're here, and we know that people, you know, are sometimes writing until the last week, and, you know, that's realistic. And if you want a set of eyes to review it in the last week, we will do our best to do that for you.
Yeah, and so I would absolutely, I mean, some of my other cities and states that I work with, they're going to be very envious when I tell them about that. So that's really great. So definitely take advantage of that. So that's like the biggest grant writing tip. And then I'll go through some other kind of nuts and bolts. And again, I'm sure people on this call have heard a lot of these, but it's worth it just in case maybe you gain one thing that you didn't think about doing in the past. Obviously, print, read, and highlight the application. I once was called by someone at the Department of Justice, and they said, Joan, if we shorten the applications, do you think that would be good? And we put a lot of stuff online. I said, well, you save a lot of trees. And they said, what do you mean? I said, the first thing everyone does is they get the RFP and then they print it. And then they can't remember they put their copy, so they print it again and they highlight it. And so, but it's important. It's important to go through because there's a lot of stuff in there. And again, reading it, you'll see new stuff every time. Second, repetition is normal. I get a lot of questions from people about But they asked the same question before. Can't I just refer to that question? No, they want you to repeat it. And in the RFP and the solicitation, it's also repeated. And even if you look at, like, I put some notes here, pages 4 to 10, it's kind of, you know, that's where the core areas we discussed, but then they talk about them again on page 16 to 20 before you begin writing. So again, there is going to be repetition. You have to do an abstract for all the Justice Department grants. I'm sure you've done this before. My advice is to do it last. I have some people who spend so much time on the abstract, and like if you did it at the end, it's like you know it by then. You could just, you know, whip it out. So I think that doing the project abstract last is a good strategy or a good way to approach it. Number 4 is something I do on everything I write, and I'll explain why. I start with an introductory paragraph in a grant application, even though this RFP or the solicitation doesn't ask for it. But dude, and the reason why, and if you remember from your peer review experience that you might have had personally, you know, sometimes you get 5 applications to review, sometimes you get 20. And you get tired. And if you can't tell what the person is proposing to do in the first page, you're kind of done, and you kind of get lost, and you're tired of reading it, and so the peer reviewer is going to not rate you as high if it takes them 8 pages to get through to what you want to do. So I always find if you put a couple sentences, introduction, you know, XYZ staff proposes to do, you know, this under this category in the grant, you know, say which category you're going, what focus area. Again, repetition, but it would really, the whole time they're reading your proposal, they'll have that in their mind.
I would like to jump in and just support everything that you're saying. I think that that providing an introductory statement that states the problem and a quick, you know, project objective and things of that sort, just right up front, even a little, you know, I think that having a small problem statement, some SACs have a bigger problem statement, you know, a little bit of a lit review, you know, I've seen all different types of versions of that, but I think whatever version is appropriate for your project, it should be there. Absolutely. I think you're 100% correct that it should be easy so that, like, immediately it's like I know the key points, and then as you're reading, you can link, oh, here it is, here's that, you know, so you can link it to, like, the meat of the sort of what the project is going to entail. We'll always be able to easily link back to that first paragraph.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, you think I just said this in the abstract or I said in the needs statement. It doesn't matter. Put it as the intro because you don't know if they read the abstract, a different document. They might not have seen that, and you just don't want them guessing. You want them to know from the beginning, you know, what you are proposing to do. Next thing is related. Use headings to help the reviewer effortlessly read your proposal. Copy from the RFP and in the exact order. Go in the exact order, the RFP, when it tells you, you know, what to write, and use the headings from there because the peer reviewer sheets are actually in that order. So they will be looking for certain sections, and if they can't find them, they'll not give you a high score on it, and it's just easy. Even though intuitively it might seem that, oh, I want to do this section first, don't. Follow their order, use their headings. Even if it adds a little more, you know, language, because, you know, you have a space limitation, so you have 10 pages, 12-point font, but you get to do single space, which I have to say a lot of grants don't, so that gives you a little more room. And then 10 pages for the core capacity building project and 15 pages for the special emphasis capacity building. And the reason I mention that is I have written grants where I thought it was both 15 pages and one was 10, and literally like the last hour I'm like going back and trying to cut, and you don't want to be that person.
And just to build on that real quickly, page 16 and 17 are where that program narrative breakdown is, and it has like section A, statement of the problem, section B, section C, section D. Now section C is the impact statement that only applies for the special emphasis project, but I would say label section A, section B, section C, like make it that obvious. It makes it more helpful and so much easier to follow. Absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. And you never want to make the reviewer work. I mean, that should be like another T-shirt I would get. The next section, this slide is a little confusing, but I just kind of want to show you because then it's not you. When you read this, you're like, wow, what are they talking about? So on section F on page 17, they talk about the performance data, the goals, objectives, and deliverables. And it's weird, like you're like, where is it? Where did they talk about this anywhere else? And you actually have to go back to page 4, which isn't even in the directions part, and halfway down you'll find a section. And it's not even really clear what you're supposed to write. Some solicitations have very clear instructions about goals and objectives, but I know they want you to put something in here. And so I recommend that you include just a single or multiple goals in this intro paragraph, and then again, more formally in one of your sections that you can pick where, C, E, or F, and then, you know, maybe talk about goals and objectives. You can also do this in a chart if you want, and I just pulled up the internet because everyone gets goals and objectives mixed up, and they kind of do mean a little different thing depending what field you're in, but for the federal grantor, you know, they want the goal to be this kind of description of where you're going, the destination, and then you measure that, how you're doing with the objective. So the objective is something you can measure, and the goal is kind of the overarching principle. And so hopefully that will help you. And I assume, and I'm, you know, my slides, you know, if Erin, you can make my slides available to everyone if they wanted a copy. Or?
Absolutely. So this will actually be, available, since it's SACS only, it will be available on Resources for SACS on that webpage on JRSA. And I wanted to also add to what you're saying in regards to the Section E, deliverables and dissemination. What helps there too is to have like insert a table that has like your 12 months if you're going to do like a 12-month program, and then your activities in a column, and then just X out, you know, by month. Like it can be so simple, but I also think that just helps just set the, you know, clearly set up and show what your plan is. So you can have it in text, but it really is just a great simple message to have it visually in sort of like a timetable. So maybe think about that for those, because I do see them often. You know, I don't know how often though they are, if they're you know, used across the board, but if you don't use it, maybe, you know, just consider it. It's not a required, but I think again, it makes things easier.
Yeah, and I'm going to have a suggestion down here how to get samples of winning proposals in a minute. But number 7, budget details. So this is downloadable. There's a link in the solicitation, and they let you do budget and budget narrative on one page. Take advantage of this. And again, don't make the reader work. I would err on the side of over-explaining. So if you're like, you know, we want to fund 0.50 FTE at $50,000 times 50% is $25,000. You know, literally write that out for them, and so they shouldn't be able to. They should be able to follow it like just they're reading it and they can understand. And then just lastly, read through what additional attachments are needed. Usually it's the same as the previous year, but I would ask colleagues at other SACs who won this grant award if you have any questions here about different attachments. I find that networking with other people writing the same grant, you get the best information, because the same question you have, they might have an answer already for it. And they can also provide examples, and they may have something, so like this chart that, you know, Erin was talking about with the timeline and the deliverables, they can just send you what they put together last year. You know, it's not, you know, there's enough funding, you know, really for everyone here, and so you're not really competing so much against each other, and also what you're writing is going to be so significantly different. It's like apples and oranges. So I think, you know, that's also a good way. There's the checklist, pages 31 to 32 and 37 to 38. Again, this repetition I mentioned. And then just lastly, because again, I'm paranoid and neurotic, make sure you are registered and that you don't submit past the deadline. So it's March 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern time zone. They will not, you know, let you, unless there's a big computer error that's on part of the Justice Department, you cannot submit it late. That being said, if there is a computer error and you call the helpline, get a case number, and hopefully no one will ever have to use that advice. But if there is some glitch in the federal system, which has happened a handful of times in my career, You call the 1-800 help number, and they should give you a case number, and that will be your backup for figuring out usually the next day what you need to do to submit it. Just going through, I want to leave time for questions, so I'm going to go a little fast here, but examples of successful grants, again, get samples from colleagues in other states. I have never had anyone I work with not give me a copy of a winning proposal. I mean, again, it's just you're helping your colleagues and you're proud of it. You want an award from it. So I would ask your other staff colleagues for copy, and that's going to be really helpful, especially if you haven't submitted an application before, or it's been a couple years, or it's in an area that you haven't worked on. Just really quickly, there are other solicitations like I talked about. It's kind of the same process. So if you Google, and this shows you how to get to the current grant opportunities, it's what I find the easiest way to identify additional funding. You can go to grants.gov, but you get so much on there, it's almost information overload. If you go through the OJP Resource Center, you can see what current grants, you can look at their program plan, which tells you what grants they anticipate releasing the rest of this fiscal year. And you can check out past awards to see who did what, and even contact some of the awardees. You can look at the titles of winning grants and say, wow, I didn't know that, Illinois did that or Colorado did that, and contact them. And again, JRSA can, maybe help you guys make those connections. They have a database, I think, on their website of all the different SACs. So today, we talked about thinking more strategically. I talked about that approach, being proactive. I talked about specific approaches to make your case for this specific grant. I gave you some hopefully good grant writing tips for this application as well as others. And I talked about, if you want to identify additional funding resources, where you might go to do that. So now I'm going to open it, and Erin is going to moderate for any questions that anyone might have.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So as we wait to see if anybody pops up with a chat question, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to jump a little bit further. So I'm going to take the ball away from you. So I know you have grant resources here on the next page. I was going to jump forward a little bit. We can always come back to the announcement again that we have a webinar coming up. And then I also want to launch the poll. So give me 1 second to do that as well. Okay. The poll should be open. So if you guys have a second, please take a moment to complete the poll. And okay, I see people are doing it. Great. And then I will go back to the grant resources page that you have and see if anybody is posting a question. Okay. One thing, while we wait to see if anybody asks a question, there is a couple questions that I've gotten via email or other phone calls from a couple of people these past few weeks, and one of them was, can the special emphasis and the core capacity grant, or I'm sorry, the budget be together? And they cannot. They have to be, again, contact your grant manager for like details, but it is necessary to keep them separate. So remember that, but you could create one big narrative where you have like the first section is your core capacity, and then underneath that is your special emphasis, and they're separate, but they're in one large work document. Okay, so here is one question. It looks like some of the performance measures don't apply to our project. How should we handle that? I think then that they're sort of non-applicable. I would, again, reach out to your grant monitor, but I have seen that before in terms of performance measures that are not, don't fit well with the methodology or the products that are part of the project, and I think it just means that that's not, that doesn't apply.
Yeah, and Erin, one other thing on performance measures, some of the most successful grants I've seen, they kind of parrot back what those performance measures are. And so they say, you know, this is what we're going to measure, this is how we're going to do it. You know, they're written in the solicitation for a reason, so use them. And if it's not applicable, just, you know, you don't have to say that, just don't mention it in your narrative.
Right. And I have found, again, this might be, you know, default to your grant monitor, but I have found that in the SAC proposals that we receive and from the past, a lot of it's just like a paragraph about how you're going to report your performance measures, and so there isn't a lot of detail that is, you know, fleshed out in that section, but something to maybe run by your grant manager.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and I think as long as you cover it, they're going to be happy when they review it. They want to see that you're thinking about measuring and what you're measuring, and sometimes, you know, even on some, not so much this grant, but there are other grants where they even have an outside evaluator, a national evaluator, but they want to, they still want you to think about it, and so that's kind of that section. But again, specifics I would also ask your grant manager or monitor.
So here's another question. Can we use the grant on software training for the project, including travel related to the training? So I definitely, I want to say that I'm pretty confident that you can use funds to dedicate to training that will be utilized to enhance the capacity of, you know, whatever aspect of the SAC. Travel related to training, I gotta say, I want to say yes, but that might be, again, a grant monitor question. But I can definitely tell you that I've seen applications where there is training or software training that is part of a grant.
You know, and Erin, I know that they require you to put in some funding to send a couple people to a conference, a BJS conference, and that's in addition. That money is over the 75 or the 150, so that's something good to know.
Oh, yes, yes. I always forget that. Thank you. And then, and again, just kind of going back to earlier, so what this could be, so, well, I'm gonna wait. So before it was, you know, you could send one person to, well, one person will be funded to go to the forum, which is now the ASU CRP, and then one person could be funded to go to one of the regional training conferences, the Eastern or the Western. So we have the Western coming up May 22nd and 23rd, and the Eastern, it will be held in the fall sometime, and hopefully we'll get that information out to you guys, you know, as soon as we begin to sort of hammer out the details. And so I think that, I think that's our last question was about the software training. So, yeah,
and if anyone has, I left my contact information, feel free. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer it. You know, reach out to me, send me an email, give me a call. I'm happy to get back to you and, you know, see what I can do. But I think, you know, you have JRSA, it's a great resource, and then your grant monitor, you really have a lot of people who want to help you write a winning proposal here.
Great. Well, Joan, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. I hope that everybody here, you know, enjoyed the discussion. And again, you can reach out to both of us for various questions, and especially reach out to me if you have any questions about our MAP program. So thank you so much, and have a good day. Take care. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.